Good afternoon, scholars. Welcome to your Thursday Vista Virtual English class. I got a lot of shout outs for, a lot of shout outs for everybody. We're getting more and more students on board, especially as some of you guys are getting online and getting Chromebooks for the first time. I got a lot of feedback on yesterday that you guys liked the read through, so I'm going to do the same thing today. But first, we're going to go over yesterday's assignment. So take a second to minimize this video and pull up your own work so that you can compare your work to the answers I'm going to go over. This seems like a lower completion percentage, but it's actually not because we hadn't been counting students who were having a hard time getting internet access. So now we've got everybody accounted for, and this is actually I'm pretty happy with this percentage. I definitely want to go up, but we're in a good place, especially considering that most schools throughout the country are well below this. So you guys are still learning, and you're really kind of getting ahead here. So great job. Let's check our work. Make sure that your work is pulled up. Pause the video if you need to. No comparison analysis today. Let's just kind of go over the best answers. Lisbeth, I want to shout out you. Let's look at Lisbeth's answers for numbers 1 through 1, 2, and kind of 3. We'll talk about 3 in a second. Number 1 is C. Francois and Perot kind of got a kick out of it because remember, these aren't their dogs. Like, they didn't raise these dogs from puppies. They don't have a strong bond to them. They buy them, they use them, and then they sell them. So their reaction even surprised me a bit. They seemed just kind of like they laughed about it. Number 2 is C. Yeah, Buck feels like he should be the lead dog since he killed Spitz. Number 3, let's go to my answers actually for this one. Number 3, we have direct evidence that A is not true because Buck was not obeying orders when he wouldn't get in the traces until they gave him Spitz's spot. So we know A is not true. We have not seen one of the dogs get injured and Buck caring for him. So there's no evidence for C, and there's no evidence for Buck cheering up the other dogs. What there is strong evidence for is that Buck makes really quick decisions and the right decisions, and there is evidence that he disciplines the other dogs. We saw him disciplining Pike to get him to pull more than his weight, and we saw him disciplining, was it Dave? Joe. It was Joe for being kind of grumpy. Buck kind of smothered him and got him to kind of start whimpering and kind of put him in place a little bit. This was quick. If you didn't pick up on it was easy to pick up that Francois hugged Buck and that he was crying. You might have missed just that one little phrase that said that if I can spell received right, that Francois received orders. We don't know what those orders are, but we do know he receives the orders, he hugs Buck and says goodbye, and then sells Buck to the new owner. So I had to do a little bit of inferring here, but I said he received orders, which must mean he's off to a new job that doesn't require Buck because he sells Buck to a new owner. Before he does so, he wraps his arms around Buck and cries. Buck was the best dog he'd ever had. Let's look at Amani's answer for number 5 because I gave a 1, 2, 3, 4. I gave a 5-sentence response, which I thought was pretty fine. But then Amani kind of blew me out of the water right here. We were interpreting the quote, but 3 battles with the fiercest brought Buck to mastery. Amani said, the following quote means that Buck was able to defeat a big pack of fierce dogs, and now he is the strongest dog. Buck has been in many fights, and Buck now has a lot of experience, and Buck has also gained strength. With all his power, he was able to defeat a pack of very strong dogs. Quote, but 3 battles with the fiercest brought Buck to mastery, so that when he bristled and showed his teeth, they got out of his way. This evidence supports that Buck beat the dogs 3 times. When he showed off his teeth, all the other dogs back away because they are scared of Buck. In conclusion, this quote shows that Buck defeated a pack of strong dogs, and now the other dogs are scared of him. I kind of hit on the same part, Imani, when I said he's proven himself to be the alpha again. We're going to look at Amani's response again for the exemplar because she and I had something really similar. First off, this agree or disagree, they don't always have a clear answer. Sometimes you can argue for either one. This one was, we can't argue it. You were to disagree with this, and Amani did a great job proving that he does not miss California. She said, I disagree that, again, as I read and as you follow along, look at the color coding. Look at all the different things look at how Amani jumps back and forth between making claims of her own, catching up with evidence that's important, but then really analyzing just really analyzing what that evidence shows and with her own thinking. Those would be the green, like we always do. She said, I disagree that Buck misses Judge Miller's estate. Buck likes to sit next to the fire and think about his past life and his experience, and Buck likes to reflect on it. Buck is mainly thinking about Judge Miller, but he keeps thinking about his old life, that his old life wasn't really a life because it had no emotions in it compared to his new life. Quote, he was not homesick. Scholars, I think that term homesick kind of threw people off. Homesick doesn't mean you're sick of your home. Homesick means you're almost sick because you miss home so bad. Okay, so if you thought that homesick means you're sick of your home and he was not homesick, then you would have flipped it and think he misses home. Homesick means you really miss home. So he was not homesick. This evidence supports that when Buck was around fire, he thinks of his old home, but overall, Buck doesn't miss his home. And we know that because if we know that homesick means to miss, she wrote school, which I know you miss school, but I think she meant home. But the text really says he isn't. Then we know that Buck doesn't miss his home. Quote, the Sunland was very dim and distant, and such memories had no power over him. Far more potent were the memories of his heredity that gave things he had never seen before a seeming familiarity, the instincts, which were but the memories of his ancestors become habits which had lapsed in later days, and still later in him quickened and became alive again. Quote's a little bit long. I found in mine, you can shorten that with just by summarizing some of it and sticking with the key words. I can show you mine real quick. So because I had the same problem, Monty. I thought that whole section was important, but I just knew it was too long to include all of it. So I said right here, quote, the Sunland was dim and distant and such memories had no power over him. So I just had to pick the part that I wanted to use the most. Amani, it seems like the part that you wanted to use the most were the parts about the instincts that are now kind of coming alive in him. This evidence supports that Buck's old life had no power to him. He realizes that it wasn't even a life. Buck has learned that a life needs to have emotions in it to be a life. And after Buck has experienced these things and felt real emotion, he gets his instincts from his ancestors, and to him, he needed to be alive in order to gain his instincts. Because Buck didn't have emotions or his instincts, he doesn't miss his home because he wasn't really living. In conclusion, Buck doesn't miss his old life. Amani, you've been crushing it. So, excellent job. All right, let's take a look at today's assignment. Today's assignment is it's 2 tasks. The first task we're going to do together is in this section, the focus is on Dave. Remember, Dave is the older, more experienced dog. He's the wheel dog. He's one of the dogs who really help train Buck and show him the ways. We're going to focus on Dave, and we're going to be taking notes as we read because you need to summarize what happened to Dave from start to finish in this section. So let's start to read this together. Get out a piece of paper. I titled mine Dave Notes and something to write with so that you can start to track as you go what's happening to Dave so that you can summarize it. This is going to be a really good opportunity to embed evidence into your own as you summarize what happened to Dave because you don't need to give an opinion yet. We're just summarizing. So let's practice on embedding keywords into our own summaries of our friend Dave. Okay, so let's get into it. We're right here on It Was a Hard Trip. It was a hard trip. Ah. Hold on. All right. My head over here. All right. It was a hard trip with the mail behind them and the heavy work wore them down. They were short of weight and in poor condition when they made Dawson, and should have had 10 days or a week's rest, at least. But in 2 days' time, they dropped down the Yukon bank from the barracks loaded with letters for the outside. The dogs were tired, the drivers grumbling, and to make matters worse, it snowed every day. This meant a soft trail, greater friction on the runners, and heavier pulling for the dogs. Yet the drivers were fair through it all and did their best for the animals. Each night the dogs were attended to. They ate before the drivers ate, and no man sought his sleeping rope till he had seen the feet of the dogs he drove. Still, their strength was down. Since the beginning of the winter, they had traveled 1,800 miles, dragging sleds the whole weary distance. And 1,800 miles will tell upon life of the toughest. Buck stood it, keeping his mates up to their work and maintaining discipline, though he too was very tired. Billy cried and whimpered regularly in his sleep each night. Joe was sourer than ever, and Solex was unapproachable, blind side or other side. But it was Dave who suffered most of all. Pay attention. Get your notes ready for when we jot down what's going on with Dave. Something had gone wrong with him. He became more morose and irritable. Morose means really negative and down, kind of depressed. He became more morose and irritable, and when camp was pitched, at once he made his nest where his driver fed him. I'm going to start to take my notes. I'm not going to share with you what my notes say. I'll show you tomorrow, but I'm going to pause to take notes so far. You should pause and take notes so far too. All right, I'm going to keep going. If you're still jotting something down, just pause me real quick while you finish up and then unpause. Let's keep going. Once out of his harness, he did not get on his feet again until harness up time in the morning. Sometimes in the traces, when jerked by a sudden stoppage of the sled or by straining to start it, he would cry out with pain. The driver examined him but could find nothing. All the drivers became interested in his case. They talked it over at mealtime and over their last pipes before going to bed, and one night they held a consultation. He was brought from his nest to the fire and was pressed and prodded till he cried out many times. Something was wrong inside, but they could not but they could locate no broken bones, could not make it out. I'm gonna pause there, take some notes. All right, if you're still uh, jotting, pause me. I'm gonna keep going. By the time KCR bar was reached, he was so weak that he was falling repeatedly in the traces. The Scotch half breed, remember again, guys, that's not a dog, that's the man. The Scotch half-breed called a halt and took him out of the team, making the next dog, Solex, fast to the sled. His intention was to rest Dave, letting him run free behind the sled. Sick as he was, Dave resented being taken out, grunting and growling while the traces were unfastened, and whimpering broken-heartedly when he saw Solex in the position he had held and served so long. For the pride of trace and trail was his, and, sick unto death, he could not bear that another dog should do his work. I'm going to take some notes. All right, I'm going to keep going. When the sled started, he floundered in the snow alongside the beaten trail, attacking Solix with his teeth, rushing against him and trying to thrust him off into the soft snow on the other side, striving to leap inside his traces and get behind him in the sled, and all the while whining and yelping and crying with grief and pain. The half-breed tried to drive him away with the whip, but he paid no heed to the stinging lash, and the man had not the heart to strike harder. Dave refused to run quietly on the trail behind the sled, where the going was easy, but continued to flounder alongside in the soft snow, where the going was most difficult, till exhausted. Then he fell, and lay where he fell, howling Guys, I don't even know what this word is. Lugubriously. Howling lugubriously as the long train of sleds churned by. Let's look up what that word means. Jack London. Where'd you get your vocabulary of yours, you high school dropout? Lugubrious means looking and sounding sad and dismal. So it's just sad, howling sadly. I'm going to take a note just now, though, about what he was doing in that paragraph. Okay. Pause me if you need. I'm going to keep going. With the last remnant of his strength, he managed to stagger along behind till the train made another stop, when he floundered past the sleds to his own, where he stood alongside Solex. His driver lingered a moment to get a light for his pipe from the man behind. Then he returned and started his dogs. They swung out on the trail with remarkable lack of exertion, turned their heads uneasily, and stopped in surprise. The driver was surprised too. The sled had not moved. He called his comrades to witness the sight. Dave had bitten through both of Solek's traces and was standing directly in front of the sled in his proper place. So if you didn't pick up on what happened, the the man went to get a light for his pipe, and when he came back, he called the dogs to go, and the dogs went, but the sled didn't go anywhere because what did Dave just do? I'm going to jot that down in my notes. He pleaded with his eyes to remain there. The driver was perplexed. His comrades talked of how a dog could break its heart through being denied the work that killed it, and recalled instances they had known where dogs, too old for the toil or injured, had died because they were cut out of the traces. Also, they held it a mercy, since Dave was to die anyway, that he should die in the traces, heart easy and content. So he was harnessed in again, and proudly he pulled as of old, though more than once he cried out involuntarily from the bite of his inward hurt. Several times he fell down and was dragged in the traces, and once the sled ran upon him so that he limped thereafter in one of his hind legs. But he held out till camp was reached, when his driver made a place for him by the fire. Morning found him too weak to travel. At harness up time, I need to pause and jot down what they decided and what they did. Morning, I'm on the second sentence of this right here. Morning found him too weak to travel. At harness up time, he tried to crawl to his driver. By convulsive efforts, he got on his feet, staggered, and fell. Then he wormed his way forward slowly toward where the harnesses were being put on his mates. He would advance his forelegs and drag up his body with a sort of hitching movement. When he would advance his forelegs and hitch ahead again for a few more inches. His strength left him, and the last his mates saw of him, he lay gasping in the snow, yearning toward them. But they could hear him mournfully howling till they passed out of sight behind a belt of river timber, river trees. Here the train was halted. The Scotch half-breed slowly retraced his steps to the camp they had left. The men ceased talking. A revolver shot rang out. The man came back hurriedly. The whip snapped. The bells tinkled merrily, and the sleds churned along the trail. But Buck knew, and every dog knew, what had taken place behind the belt of river trees. Take a second to finish up your Dave notes. Okay, so you should have all the notes that you need to write what happened to poor Dave in this section. Really try to embed some evidence and just embed some words from the text in with your own, just as good practice, and it helps make your writing a little bit more convincing and clear. All right, here's your second task. In writing the last few days of Dave's life, is London's intention to teach the reader a lesson about life or about death? Pick a side and determine a theme. I should say argue. Argue which theme London is conveying. Okay, so we saw what happened with Dave. We saw how he just couldn't go on like he used to, no matter how hard he tried. And it also showed, even when he was in so much pain, he didn't want to get out of work. He would do anything to keep working, because we know that Dave, Solix, Buck, they love the work. And we just saw how it ended for Dave. So I want you to pick a side here. London could be teaching us a few different things from this. Which one do you feel he was arguing? And how are you going to prove it with your analysis of how London teaches this lesson? If you're saying that your two options are this is a lesson of life and it teaches us that having a purpose makes life worth living. You also might argue that this is a lesson of death, a theme of death, that life goes on without you, no matter what you contributed. Which one do you want to argue? Pick one. Argue the life theme, or argue the death theme, and then break down the words or the descriptions that London used to show this theme. Okay, so this is a lot of you're arguing for a theme and proving how London proved it with your author's craft. You should also speak, just on your own thoughts on this, or like make sure you show that your own thinking of, you know, how London proves it, but also why, why, uh, or why is it significant? Okay. Um, can't wait to read your writing on this. I can't wait to hear the debates that take place in office hours today. And a quick reminder, just for tomorrow, there are no office hours tomorrow, but there are today. So reread this section if you need, and make up your mind. Is London is the stronger theme in these pages that um, one of life, that having a purpose makes life worth living, or is it one of death, which is life goes on without you, no matter what you contributed? Okay. And you can use evidence, and if you need to bring up facts from before these pages, do so. Okay, you may need to, especially if you focus on the death part. You can bring up facts, if not necessarily quote some earlier in the book. That's just fine. Okay. All right, you guys keep up the great work, and I will see you tomorrow.